it's just wonderful to be freed of those. And one of the beautiful things was seeing Ram Dass, who at this point, he was ill more than he was healthy this past year. He's 88 and quite frail. And he came out on the stage in his wheelchair, and he can't really talk much anymore. But he can say some things, but it's just not predictable when the words will come out and when they won't, and he doesn't know. And so he was leading a meditation, and sometimes his voice would be very sort of, that smooth meditation voice, and he was teaching the meditation that he really loves, which say, I am loving awareness. I mean, you can just do it for a minute. To just say to yourself quietly, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. And then simply loving awareness. Loving awareness. Loving awareness. You can open your eyes, but then sometimes his voice would come out, loving awareness, in the middle of the quiet. I am loving awareness. I mean, he couldn't, modulate it. And so there he was. He wasn't struggling because he doesn't struggle with it. It's just whatever it is. And that's a teaching in and of itself, to be that comfortable with your condition and who you are in any given moment. And I thought to myself, when do we ever get to see this? Somebody really old, really frail, in their wheelchair. They can't really talk properly the way we get to talk, who don't have aphasia. And there were all these young people at this retreat, which was also nice and refreshing to see. And I think, probably due to some of the resurgence of interest in the plant medicines of various kinds. And I thought, how wonderful to get to see an elder in this condition on a stage, being loved and beaming out love, that is completely unimpaired, that capacity. He's just a beacon of love. And how generous of Ram Dass to offer himself in that way, to be seen in that way, instead of feeling like he shouldn't because he can't really talk, or because of do you know what I mean, that he shouldn't, no, I can't go on the stage this year, or just that kind of generosity to just show up and offer yourself. And it's a kind of service, really, to all of us. And I feel that way. As I was saying, I thought, volunteers are like that. We just show up when we're volunteering. I wanted to help clean up last night, and Jack was like, that's not your job anymore. You need to come and blah, 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 whatever else we had to go do. But it's actually makes Ram Dass so happy to be able to use himself and his life in this way. He was so joyful, and he was not sick after the retreat, which, I think he was better, actually, for having had the chance to be with everybody, and how generous that was. So we could talk about this for a long, long time. I have a lot of things, but I also, George, I was just sharing some appreciation for our volunteers and for that spirit of seva, of service, and the generosity that is behind that. And especially this time of year, I don't know about you, I'm getting in the mail, these just piles of requests for all these great causes, and just putting them all in the recycle. I don't even know if they're really being recycled anymore, but it's a time when we feel, I wish I could give to all of them, of course, if I gave to all of them, I would get 10 times more from all the ones that they tell about. Anyway, I don't know how they find out, but they do. And but volunteering is another way to give. It's a wonderful way to give. So I want to encourage everybody to feel that they can join that and identify in that way. Look, we identify with things all the time. I am this, I am that, I am the other thing, I'm too this, I'm too that, I'm not enough of this, I'm not enough of that. It's a weird process that our minds go through in this way. And when George has an ear infection, he says, I have an ear infection. He doesn't say, I am an ear infection. It doesn't become his entire identity, I don't think. Yeah, thank you. And I loved that Ram Dass was like, why don't we just identify with loving awareness? Why don't we just, return our attention to that over and over again? Anyway, I want to make room for you, George, to share some thoughts, and then we'll invite everybody and have some exchange.
Well, good morning. I think my mic is on.
Yeah.
Good morning. It's great to be here. And when I talked to Trudy, because she didn't know I wasn't feeling well until yesterday, and I had enough when I'm in flow or when I'm teaching or I'm sitting, the symptoms don't seem to be so apparent. But then when I sit down and relax, it kind of hits me. But I never thought of not coming or not being of service, because to me, I was thinking about this topic, and I remember reading somewhere where it said, serve to be perfect and be perfect to serve. And that always hit me right here, because when I struggle and I forget about myself, I find myself. When I can just serve and say, okay, how can I be of service? How can I volunteer? And so we have this idea that volunteering is when we're involved in InsightLA or some other venture we're on. But in my mind, volunteering is something we can do all day long. And so it was interesting. So yesterday when we were passing out the protection cords, there was a gentleman from Korea TV that was on the camera, and I just gave him a protection cord, and he kind of looked at me like, oh, he didn't expect that. But to me, volunteering is volunteering your kindness, volunteering loving awareness, or just acknowledging the other person. And so when I stay in hotels or wherever I go, especially back home when I go into Whole Foods, they all know me. Hey, hi George, how you doing? And, oh, you haven't been here for a while. What's going on? Because I go in and I engage them, and it's like my goal is to meet or release the divine spark in each and every human being. So part of doing that is just having an open heart, open mind, and just engaging. So volunteering that kindness, volunteering that love, volunteering that engagement is something that I find myself engaged in more and more. And the more I do it, the more it becomes just a habit of just doing that. So I appreciate the volunteers, and of course I don't let any of them go by me without hugging me. So I go in, but I ask permission, I just don't hug them. But at the same time, yes, that's a good thing. But at the same time, it's how can we be more inclusive? There's actually a book called Radical Inclusion. How can we be more inclusive? And I see volunteering or just being generous. I guess that's another way of saying volunteering or being of service or even donating and giving to causes. It's actually an antidote to greed. And so in my mind, I'm always practicing. I'm always trying. Well, I won't say try, because Yoda said do or do not. There's no try. My intention is to be as present as I can, and to be as open as I can, and to be as loving as I can, even if it's just a quiet tolerance. It's always an opportunity to do that. So to me, it's an opportunity for me to be here, to partake. And I've been saying a lot lately, I don't belong anywhere, and that's why I belong everywhere. So what is up with that one? And what I realize is that sometimes when we identify with a group or with an illness, and because we see ourselves that way, that limits what's available to us, how we could be. And so for me, it's always to be engaged, but not to be so engaged that I lose myself and that I take on a whole energy or a whole way of seeing the world.
Here, yeah, just pull it out a teeny bit.
Okay, could you hear me now? Yes. So to me, it's just finding creative ways of being love, of being kind. I shared this yesterday at the presentation. I have this young man that I was working with, and he's having very challenging. He's been to several different schools, just really challenging being places. And I said to him, well, what do you want? He says, I want respect. I said, then you got to be respectful. And he said to me, I learned that in kindergarten. But I forgot about it. I said, well, there's a book. It's called All the Things I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten or something like that. And so a lot of this stuff we know, we've been reminded, but we forget. Or we get away from it. So to me, the challenge, because I go into so many different environments, is to be present, to meet people where they are, but also to have some self-integrity, to retain who I am. But I can go in and be part of, but then I can be available to go other places, so I'm not bringing the place that I was at with me into the next endeavor. And I've done that because I've been in 12 steps. I've been in this one, and be honest with you, it's very rare that I can come in and speak somewhere without editing myself, because I got to remember where I am and what the language is. And so for me, Trudy knows this, I don't like being in a box. I don't like saying, people say, well, are you a Buddhist? No. Are you a Christian? No. And they said, well, who are you? I said, well, the Buddha, when they asked him that question, he just said he was awake. He didn't call himself a Buddhist. So maybe there's something for us to learn there, that maybe we need to understand that it's important to be part of a community, but who are we being, and can we be consistent with who we are no matter where we are? And so I'm reading this book, and the line that caught me was, and I apologize for the pronoun I'm using, but it's about man to be himself, but also to be for himself. And this is what Dr. Dre said. He said, I have my mind on money, money on my mind. That's a form of meditation. And he also said, I got my money on me. I got my money on me. And some people say, well, that's selfish. Yeah, well, in my mind, you got to be selfish to be selfless. And I'll end with that.
Leave us in the paradox, right?
Yeah, well, it's not my business how you handle that one.
Thanks, George.
I'm a rabble rouser. She knows that. Provocateur.
Yeah.
You got a hand over there.
Wait, we need to give you the mic, so yeah. It's coming your way. Wait, Julie, it's almost there.
Yeah.
That's what you just said, and of course I love that song because I'm old school, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I love the
Hold
80s
it
rap.
up to your mouth, please.
80s rap is
Thank
all that
you.
and a bag of chips. But this, I went to another sitting meditation with a friend of mine, and the guest speaker shared, God gave me two hands, one to help myself and one to help others.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not in a good place yourself, how do you give that goodness out to the world? So it very much reminded me of that. So thank you for reminding me of that. It was nice to hear again.
Thanks, and I love your enthusiasm about answering the question.
Yeah, we can just have we can just teach through. I actually like teaching through the dialogue because then we actually know that what we're saying is what you would like to hear about, as opposed to just our idea of what to say. And also, I think, when I was listening to you talk about just, respect and be respectful, when I first started to hear these teachings in a Dharma context, they made me so impatient. I am admiring of you because you don't seem to be as impatient as I felt, because I thought, well, what does being kind or being generous, or what does that have to do with like consciousness and what understanding what is reality and understanding? Like, these are the things I wanted to know about not being generous or respectful, or do you know what I mean? It just sounded very much like what I learned in kindergarten. And as the years have passed and I have the opportunity to sit with friends like George or people like Father Greg Boyle, who is the Homeboy Industry founder and who sat and was with us yesterday, when I have the chance to sit with people who are genuinely devoting their lives to volunteering kindness everywhere they go, there's a palpable feeling. You can feel it. Yesterday, when and some of you were there, when we were sitting with Father Greg, he had said he didn't want to give a talk. He just wanted to have it be an exchange with Jack and me. So we were sitting up there, and true to his word, he didn't say anything. And I said, would you like to say anything? And he said no. And so we had prepared some questions so that it wouldn't just be like totally awkward. And we had prepared some questions, and so that I was going to say, so that we wouldn't have to sit and meditate. We had prepared questions and we had some conversation, but whenever there would be a lull in the conversation, the quality of that stillness around him and with him, well, I felt it sitting with you this morning. I really felt it too. There is, it's wonderful to explore what is consciousness, what are we, what is reality anyway that we're involved in. But there's something different that happens when we incline our hearts in the direction of just being love. And that, by the way, is a little bumper sticker that everybody at the Ram Dass retreat, they got. It was be love. Anyway, anybody
Can I
would
get
like,
one of those?
Yeah, I have. I actually will give you mine. Michael.
Thank you, and George, thank you. George, when you were talking about being selfish to be selfless, I was thinking of a teaching that I have where it goes something like, you can't give what you don't have, and you got to take care of yourself first. And I'd love to hear, how do you balance the next right action when it comes to being selfish and being selfless sometimes? 'Cause sometimes they don't always go together.
How do I balance being selfish with selfless? Is to remember that when I'm working on myself, when I'm doing this, even though it's for me, there's no way I can sit and be still and say no to unwholesome mind states like anger, frustration. There's no way I do that and it doesn't have a ripple effect throughout the universe. I call it morphogenic fields, is I guess a technical term. So even though I'm working on myself, I'm also working on others, and especially when I understand that the best way for me to keep it is to give it away. And so it's a paradox, right? But when I'm working on myself, I'm also working on you. And it may not just be you like individually, but it's an energy, and it's a recognition that I and other are one. Now it's interesting because when Trudy was talking about going up there and not saying who she is, she's coming from that space of no self, or what I would call beyond the illusion of separateness. So she kind of forgets herself. So even though it might seem like, oh, you have to tell people, in her mind, it's not about her. I'm just,
No, it's true.
just your experience.
It's
and
true.
so sometimes we forget, oh, we got to talk, or we got to say who we are. But to in that space, it's just being, right? And so we have to get away from, I gotta take responsibility for this self, but it's to begin with myself, and this is from Martin Buber's Way of Man, to begin with yourself, but not to end with yourself. And so it's yes and, not either or. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Abigail, then Albert.
Hi. So I have this thing that I do similar to what you do. I've been known to talk to people in the elevators, an airplane, at the co-op, wherever I go. And when I leave a day like yesterday, I always feel like I'm a better friend, a sister, a mother, a grandmom, just a representative of the world at large. And I have evidence of that because I had to pick something up at a dress shop in Montana last night. And this 81-year-old woman, she identified herself as an 81-year-old woman who looked very spry and energetic and together, came up to me and said, I was glowing and radiant, and what do I do to keep that? And it was like, we talked for a half hour in the store. We just engaged. She told me about her life, her grandchildren, this, that, and it was just lovely. And it's like if more people could do that and reach out, because you never know what's going on, where somebody is in their life at that moment where they just need to talk to somebody and connect. So thank you for connecting with us yesterday and today and always.
Well, the question is, who's connecting with whom?
Yeah.
So, is mic on? Yeah. So I'm going to try to drop in for a second so that I can ask you this question, George, because I was really struck by the way that you characterized the way that you share as being in flow, and you noted that when you are in that state, when you're sharing, the discomfort or the pain, your suffering, let's say with your ear infection, seems to move into the background. But then it was really interesting how you said, but then I think that you were implying that then when you're not there, when you're not present like that it seems that discomfort or that suffering kind of comes back into the foreground a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think the question came up for me as to then, if you could, would you always try to be in flow? Like, what's happening? What's that transition from being there and then not?
So the interesting thing about being in flow is conditional. And so when I'm not in flow, when the conditions change because of impermanence, then I'm not in flow. So it changes. So you can't sustain it. But here's the paradox about flow. If you try to get in flow, you can't. So it's conditional. In other words, under the right conditions. So when the conditions change, that change. So no, you can't sustain it. And part of it is the best way to get into flow is accept when you're not in flow, and just keep moving. You just keep moving. But there's science on it, and we know all this stuff that it has to do with the immediacy of experience. And if you can shorten the feedback loop and then make adjustments to it, it happens. So it's like you got to be on that edge of, you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So when you get challenged, so challenge is important. There's a ratio between challenge and skills, but also the feedback loop. And there's all these other things that are happening. But at the end of the day, it's just a matter of just being with what is and seeing things as nature. The way things are happening is because there's a lawfulness to it, and my relationship to it, and my ability ability to say yes and allows me to kind of be in flow, because even though I was uncomfortable and I wasn't in flow per se, like you could see it, but there was a presence observing my experience without being identified with it. That makes any sense. And the thing about flow is you forget yourself, and and time and space gets altered. And so the intention is, to be in flow or to be present, or another way of saying flow is be spontaneous. And to be spontaneous is just things are happening and you're just rolling with it. But I don't have the energy to sustain that, especially when I'm not feeling good, and especially when I'm not in a situation where I'm getting a feedback. That's why athletics, and when there's a beginning, middle, and end, you have some semblance of being able to get in the flow, or because there has to be a complexity with what's happening. They can't. So once you get used to something, and you get to a certain level of flow, it's like a step function. So I go up, I'm in flow, then I'm in flow, then I'm back going towards boredom again, and then it's like this. And so you have to keep, the more complexity you have, the more challenging your life is, or the more challenging the immediacy of experience is, the more opportunity you have to get in flow. So you get used to it. So you're flowing, but once you get there, It's not flow anymore.
Interesting.
And the question was, if you could, would you continuously try to drop back into it?
What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's the intention, but also I got to watch the greed, because greed in the mind, even spiritual greed, is a problem. So it's a paradox, right? It's like there's times you can do it, times you can't, but it seems like when I get out of the way, things work out okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Great question.
Trudy, I was struck by something, one of the things you said yesterday, where you said, when we have the flu, we say, I have the flu. You don't say, I am the flu. But if we have a feeling, we would say, I am angry. You wouldn't say the other. And it's really something to think about. It would make a great whole Dharma talk, but thank you for saying that yesterday. It's got me to thinking.
I said it again today about his ear infection. Yeah. No, I was struck by that too. What we choose, the language we use to identify with something completely versus understanding it's a part of who I am at this time. It's not all of who I am. And even though we may intellectually know that about our emotions, they get so strong. And it's hard to have that. Mindfulness has to get strong too, to be able to be present with an emotion as opposed to 100% lost in it and identified with it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Hi. I was gonna talk about identification. I am an immigrant, and I feel, and I identify like that. And in my group, my social group is almost all immigrants from all over. And then starting to learn about their cultures, I just started to say, well, I'm not from Spain anymore. I'm not totally from Mexico. I'm from Venezuela. I'm from Peru. It's like every time I open more my social life, I was kind of losing more my identification as Spaniard. And I was trying to tell that the other day to a friend. It's like when I'm able to identify, just see more as a human being to everybody, it's like I'm losing myself. I mean, every time now I go to Spain, I'm like, I don't know what I am anymore. But I don't care, actually, because I think I feel more connected with something, with a human being, because now I'm like, I don't know, I just put myself at the same place as everybody else in any part of the world. And I don't know, I was just I'm thinking a lot about the identification, and I'm, going to these groups or immigrants group, and I'm like, why I'm going to there? It's like, why I have to identify to something or to a special group. I don't know. It's just,
I think you do know.
What?
I think you do know, Pilar.
Yeah.
Like what you're describing is exploring your identity in the context of discovering it's so much more than you thought. It's so much bigger than you thought. It's not that you are not an immigrant or not of Spanish descent or not. Those things are true, but you are not only that. And you have expanded your capacity to identify with other countries and other cultures and other humans to the point where then you belong to all of humanity. I think that's what you're describing. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Could I say something? I fell in love with the name Pilar after watching that movie. Was it For Whom the Bell Tolls? Is that the one? With the, Gary Cooper and Amy Bergman. There's a movie, and one of the characters, her name is Pilar. She's a strong woman and just really, really tough and gentle at the same time. So when I hear that name Pilar, there's a lot of power in it. Yes.
And what you said is powerful. Thank you.
As basic as these questions come, but I was wondering if you'd share more about what it's like to be around Ram Dass, somebody who's been so important to you, and each time increasingly feels like perhaps the last time, and that sort of experience.
Yeah, every year we think it's the last time, actually. And this year, I think it kind of lulled me. Like every year, we think it's the last year, and then he had been so sick before the retreat that I didn't think he was going to make it to the retreat at all. And so then he was there, and he was alert and enjoying himself and radiant, and so you just really don't know. So one of the things about being around him is we really don't know how he's going to be. He doesn't know, day to day how he's going to be. And watching him, I was going to say navigate, but that makes it sound too intentional. Watching him flow with that process, actually, is one of the inspiring things about being around him. And watching my own, obviously I prefer being around him when he's sharp and present and attentive than when he's just kind of like, knocked out on antibiotics or something. But I think what it's like to be around Ram Dass is, I feel it with George, felt it yesterday, around Father Greg, I feel it lots of times with different people, is when you're around somebody whose intention is, whose understanding of consciousness and reality is that fundamentally it's loving energy or benevolent energy, and whose intention it is to live in that way from that place, it feels great. That's what it feels like to be around. It feels good because you're included in that. We're all loved just the way we are. And Ram Dass, he says, and I think he really practices that he does love everybody and everything equally. Now, if you want to be special with him, that's a little more tricky. You have to then witness your own ego wanting to be, I want to be your special one. I want you to specially love me. I'd like to be one of your favorites, if not the favorite, et cetera, et cetera. You just watch the mind do that. Or with his most sort of intimate companion and caregiver, not romantic, but Dasima, who has been in service to him now for 14 years, every single day. I think she went away a couple times to get her knees replaced or something. She had to. But basically, she's with him every single day. And it used to be that if he would get grumpy with her because she was in a position of having to make him take certain medicines or whatever, if he would just get impatient with her because he is a human being, basically if he looked at her in a way that she felt was unloving, just his impatience or something, she would be bent out of shape the whole rest of the day. Like we always knew, because Dasima would be in a mood. And that does not happen anymore. Like I've watched her being around him every day change and become so stable, so devoted, and talk about being in flow, pretty uninterruptedly. So that's the effect of somebody being around him on a daily basis who is devoted to generosity and service, obviously. Yeah, there's that. I don't know if that's an answer for you, but yeah.
It seems like a big part of this actually is losing your own self-consciousness in this process.
And I like that you say self-consciousness, because we can't lose ourselves. Then we're just psychotic. Really, we couldn't function. But self-consciousness, that yes, I struggle with that so much in the public speaking arena. Mm-hmm. And having a service orientation, this is really just to share with people. It's not about me and whether people like me or don't like me or etc. Endless, right? Endless.
Right.
I mean, you know it. You have it yourself. Don't deny it. I know you do. Because we all do. You come to a point in your practice when you realize that what you're experiencing is what people experience. And it's very liberating and joyful to realize that. And it's not, it's not the exact, like I'm not going to have the exact kinds of reactions that Alexandra might have or that Rick might have or whatever. But so it's not like that, but we all have the reactions and we all have to figure out how to be with them. We're all the same that way. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm?
Thank you for today. I recently saw Mr. Rogers, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and you're talking about intentional service and reaching out to people. If you get a chance to see it, I highly recommend it, because Tom Hanks, his pacing, he completely embraces each moment so painstakingly, to look into the eyes of this stranger and say, really understand where they're at. And it's so powerful. It's really wonderful. So I want to recommend that. I am personally at a place where a whole bunch of stuff is coming up based on a new relationship or a changed relationship in my life. And I'd rather not deal with it. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of shame from my past and, abuse and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, I feel like it's important for me to walk through it and not run from it. And walk into it regardless of how I feel. But I want to ask your opinion on that, because it is, I think a lot of healing is possible, especially if I can get out of my own way and be service-minded. But I'm afraid of letting go of the shame, and I'm afraid of I don't know where I end and someone else begins. And you said it's not losing yourself, it's losing your self-consciousness. So I don't know if that's too many questions, but maybe
I think it's pretty clear. Do you want to? It's very clear, actually.
So that as you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind was self-compassion. So slow motion gets you there quicker, and the only way out is through. And this is where I talk about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And the best way to do that is in increments, and not to go from 0 to 60, but to just intend and just, have compassion. Because there's no, so the intention is, okay, so, and I'm thinking about, you're doing this and it's uncomfortable, so we want to, if you're doing it in order to get rid of something or in order to not feel that bad, that's a form of aversion also. And so it's just being really sensitive, and slow motion gets you there quicker. And just incrementally going and tolerating as much discomfort as you can, but not going over a certain limit. And this is interesting because when you're in flow, when you get in the flow, you get into a high state of arousal, and it's the ability to stay calm and stay mindful that you move from a high state of arousal into flow. So it's also just really being clear about being sensitive to how you're feeling and how much you can tolerate. And we know this from they have the flow genome. When you get better each day, you only have to get better like 4%. Anything above 4%, or if it gets too much anxiety, then it's counterproductive. So there's a certain amount of uneasiness or discomfort we can tolerate. I think they say up to 4%. So anything over 4% makes it undoable. So the idea is it's hard to do but doable, and this kind of tracks with the neuroplasticity when they talk about the optimum states for neuroplasticity is number one, having oxygen, so get your aerobic rate up, so because you're really talking about creating a new neural net. And the second thing is it has to be incremental. And the third thing is it has to be hard to do but doable. And then the fourth thing I think they talk about is the idea of being interested. And so when we become interested in something, it stimulates the motivational circuits in the brain. So all of that is consistent with slow motion that gets you there quicker, and just do today, and then because in that way you get into a flow, and 1 + 1 won't equal 2, 1 + 1 will equal 6. So you'll be going like this, and then you'll have a trajectory. But it's not something you can intend. It's something that has to happen at its own speed. Does that make sense?
And what I really appreciate about what George said, and we do have to stop, is that it gives you a way to gauge something that if you really do have, when people have a background of having been abused or violated in some way, they have become accustomed to having somebody run over their boundaries. And so the usual responses to threat or danger aren't always there because they've been, run over, or that's the word that keeps coming. So that's why I like this sort of incremental understanding of the elements of, yes, I need to work with the difficulty of this, but I also need to remember the self-compassion piece, which is that I don't need to totally surrender all at once to any situation. So thank you. Yeah. So let's just sit together for a moment. So whenever we have a chance to receive teachings and do some learning and exploring together through meditation and conversation, through study and practice, we express our gratitude for this priceless opportunity by offering the goodness of our practice, whatever we've learned, whatever's been beneficial and helpful. We just share, offer imaginatively to all beings everywhere without exception. May we and all beings grow in our capacity for love, for kindness, for tenderness, for self-compassion, and just plain old compassion. So I want to again express gratitude to our volunteers and invite you to have some refreshments, everybody together. I want to give a little shout out to Pepe, who is here, who keeps everything running and painted and beautiful. And also, yes. And also Pepe, like George, he has that wherever he goes, the way that he talks to people, they become his friend. So whatever he does is like, oh yeah, my friend there and my friend over there and then my friend in the other place and my friend, and it's like, we can inhabit a world like that. It's possible. So thank you for your teaching for that, Pepe. And thank you everybody for coming to practice together. And I want to remind you, 'tis not only the season to be jolly, 'tis the season to give. So if you want to become a monthly donor, just think of that one dinner per month that you aren't having with a friend. Instead, you're giving it to what you really value to make sure it thrives and keeps going and is available to more people, because our world right now really needs these teachings and practices. So thank you everybody, and I'll see you next week.